Hi and welcome to another CSD Fantasy YouTube video. Tony Romo's future is still unknown. One of the teams people have been discussing the most is the Denver Broncos. So today I'm going to look into what that would mean for fantasy. If you watch Romo as a Texan, you know Romo's past tendencies already. But hey, what's one more time? So let's dig into that. Most of his passes go through the short right zone, while the middle sees less love both on the short and the deep zones. When looking at his accuracy, however, we see that the deep middle zone is his most accurate deep area, while the short middle pass is his best zone overall. He sees some difficulties throwing outside the numbers on the deeper balls, but nothing too alarming. Shown here is the Broncos' target distribution of their 6 most targeted players. The Broncos have been targeting the short left zone more than any other over the last 3 years. Their least targeted zone has been the deep middle one, but after looking at a lot of teams, the deep middle usually sees less targets than the outside, so this is nothing extreme. I will be looking at where they've gained the most yards for in a minute, but first, the Broncos have a new offensive coordinator, so I took a look at how Mike McCoy called 500 of his pass plays last year with the Chargers. He has almost the same percentages as the Broncos. The main zone has been the short left followed by the short right. The least targets it's in the deep middle one, so that's the same as the Broncos. Looking at where the Broncos have gained the most of their yards from over the last 3 years, the short left zone dominates all others. It is, however, not the most productive one since it was targeted 32% of all throws but only yields 29% of the yards. Their most productive zone is the deep middle. It was their least targeted zone, but it outperforms with 4%. Their least productive zone is the short right one. It underperforms the targets with 6%. Let's put the Broncos numbers in relation to Romo right now. We see the best synergies with the Broncos and Romo in the short left zone, where Romo throws 31% of his passes, while the Broncos had 32% of their passes thrown there over the last 3 years. It's also the most targeted zone for 5 of the 6 plays I've been studying. When looking at the completed percentage changes from Simeon, Romo hits on 22% more passes in the deep right. That is the Broncos' most targeted deep zone. Romo is 18% better in the short middle zone. This is not a big synergy with the Broncos' passing patterns, but it's still a major improvement from Simeon. Romo's only 3% better in the short left zone, but seeing as that can be more than a third of all the passes, it can potentially lead to a small fantasy benefit for the receivers, especially in PPR. I think Romo will fit well with Mike McCoy. They both prefer the short right followed by the short left. Both McCoy and Romo likes to target the running backs with over 10% of all the passes. I'm not sure how much bad you can find with Romo going to the Broncos, but I've tried to find some things that don't fit too well. So this is going to be a little bit of nitpicking, but Romo only hits on 45% of his throws to the deep left. That is the deep zone the Broncos gets most of their yards from. It's only 10%, but hey. Romo also posts a 3% worse completion percentage than Simeon in that zone. And speaking of Simeon, he had a better completion percentage when targeting the deep left and the deep middle in 2016 than Romo had in his amazing 2014 season. Romo's most productive and accurate deep zone is the middle one. That is the zone that McCoy calls the fewest plays in, so that's not the greatest fit ever. But as I said, I've been trying to find some worse regions where they won't match up that well with each other. But looking at a player synergy, I've looked at Demaryius Thomas, who will be the major beneficiary of Romo going to the Broncos. Romo throws 31% of his throws to the short left. Thomas is used to seeing 33% of his targets from that zone, so that matches well. He also produces 29% of his yards from those throws. Both Thomas and Romo has the short right as their second most targeted zone, 28% of Romo's passes and 31% of Thomas's targets and 26% of his yards. Neither of them focus on the deep middle, with 5% of Romo's passes, 3% of Thomas's targets, and 7% of his yards. I would be significantly higher on Thomas if Romo became a Bronco. Trying to find a bad fit, I've chosen Emmanuel Sanders. Once again, I'm just trying to find something bad, so you gotta take it with a pinch of salt. Romo only completes 47% of his passes to the deep right zone, a zone Sanders sees 15% of his targets. That is his third most targeted zone, so as I said, nitpicking. Sanders also gains 19% of his yards from the deep right, so he could potentially lose some, but not much, especially since Romo's completion percentage is actually 22% better than Simeon's in that zone. So the bad fit might not be the best phrasing. It should potentially have been the least amazing fit. I would love the receivers in Denver with Romo much more than the receivers in Houston if it went there. But we know Romo has a hard time staying healthy, so it might not be that big of a difference anyway. If you only look through a fantasy football lens, I would love Romo in Denver. I believe he would bring a ton of fantasy value to receivers that we got used to being top guys with Peyton Manning. We know that Denver's offensive line is not the best, so the risk of injury is definitely there. But I would think it would bring fantasy value to some guys that had lost some over the last 2 years. Thank you very much for watching. Please leave a thumbs up and subscribe. Everything is very much appreciated. You can also check out my Instagram and Twitter for more charts and numbers with links in the bio. Go to CSD Fantasy's website for more numbers, and as always, the spreadsheets are dark and full of terror.